Welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. My dad will be so grateful. See you next time on the Mindful Fire podcast.
Welcome to the Mindful Fire podcast, where we explore living mindfully on the path to financial independence and beyond. I'm your host, Adam Coelho, and I'm so glad you're here. On today's episode of the podcast, we're doing something a little different. We're dipping into the archives going back to March of this year when I was joined by my friend Cara Bradley on the podcast. Cara talks a lot about mental fitness, a term I've been hearing more and more all over the place. So I wanted to bring this episode back up since a lot of people are new to the podcast and probably didn't catch it the first time. Cara is a leading authority of mental fitness, having led thousands through her signature strategies to work and play in flow. She shares her 30 years of body-brain training with Fortune 500 companies, startups, and premier college sports teams. Cara's expertise includes science-backed tools for optimal performance, including nervous system, flow state, and mindfulness training, in addition to strategies to optimize the gut-brain connection. She's the author of the book, On the Verge, Wake Up, Show Up, and Shine, founder of the award-winning Verge Yoga Center, and host of the On the Verge Mental Fitness podcast. On this episode, Cara and I explore the idea of mental fitness, an area she's dedicated most of her career to. We learn what it is and how we can practice it. We also explore the connection between our gut and our brain, and we spend a good bit of time talking about the flow state. And Cara shares how mindfulness and meditation help us to identify our own flow triggers and the activities that put us in a state of flow. Cara also generously offered to share her mental fitness protocol with our audience, and you can get that at mindfulfire.org/Cara. You can find all of the resources, books, and practices shared in this episode at mindfulfire.org/46. I really enjoyed this episode with my friend Cara Bradley. I hope that you enjoyed as well. Let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, Cara.
Thanks, Adam. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm very excited to dive into many topics with you today, but would love to start by having you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about what you're up to in the world.
All right. I am all about the body and the brain. I've spent my whole career either in my own personal pursuit of understanding how to optimize body practices, body performance, and also mental performance. What's so exciting about being alive right now is that we are learning so much, just even in the timeline of my own career. We've learned so much about the brain. We're learning so much about the nervous system. We're learning so much about the gut-brain connection. We can go in any one of those directions. I love talking about how to really optimize is a good word, but it's really synchronize all of the systems in our body so that we feel our best, we perform our best, and we experience our lives fully.
Experience our lives fully. That's, I think, what we're all trying to do. I know that a big part of your work is around this idea of mental fitness. Can you share a little bit about what mental fitness is and how you teach it?
Yeah, I love this term, mental fitness. I've been talking about it for a long time. I'm old enough to remember like the beginning of the physical fitness trend when people started to jog. And then they started to do what was called calisthenics. And then we started to do aerobics. And obviously now everybody understands physical fitness, how to cross train, and that basically we need to move our bodies every day. So that's a given now. But about 10 years ago, I started to look at the whole idea of mental fitness and questioning. We have so many people, and most people, especially now where we're at in the world, most people are dealing with chronic stress, anxiety, doubt, uncertainty, brain fog, all of these mental issues, I'll say. And I'm not even including depression and so forth. But what if we started to look at how to improve and balance and stay healthy mentally like we do our bodies. So this whole idea of mental fitness came about, and I started looking at how would we cross-train for mental fitness? And it's not all in your head. I think that a lot of people think it's only about meditation, and that's part of it, or it's only about mindset training or talking to a therapist, which of course could be extraordinarily helpful and necessary in some respects. But for me, mental fitness is really about how body systems work with our mind. So how do our body systems, such as our cardiovascular system, our immune system, our nervous system, when those systems work synergistically with our mindset and our belief systems and the way that we're moving in the world, how we're dealing with our thoughts, when everything is synchronized and working together, I believe that amplifies our experience of aliveness. It amplifies how we react or don't react in the world. I know that's a big answer to your question, but really it's about getting our body and our mind to work together so that we can experience life again, like I said before, more fully.
Yeah. And what are some practices that people can do to get those body systems and mind systems more in sync?
Yeah, good question. I'll start with the obvious because I think most of us know by now we want to move our body every day in some capacity. We want to have some type of contemplative time, either in nature, time in prayer, journaling, gratitude, or even time alone doing, what you love to do, whether that be an art or some type of hobby or cooking. Just having time spent in solitude and in silence can help. So we have moving our body, some type of contemplative practice, and then there's the awareness practices like mindfulness. Building awareness, having the capacity to be able to know, to see, to sense what's happening right here, right now in this moment is extraordinarily helpful for us to move forward in a way that is more present. The obvious practices are moving your body, being in some type of contemplative practice, and having an awareness practice, right? Those are the obvious ones. Then I like to go deeper. I like to lift up the hood of the car and to get inside the engine and to see how our systems work. And I've spent a lot of time investigating the nervous system. And there's this wonderful word that I love called coherence. And when our nervous system is in coherence, it really means that we're both clear and we're calm, right? We're both alert, our mind is alert, but we're also at ease. And this calm clarity is also another way of describing mindfulness. To be mindful is to be clear and awake and alert, but calm and at ease in who you are, in your body and your mind. So we can train our nervous system to be in coherence more often, or to understand how to snap back into a state of coherence. And the best way to do that, Adam, is with our breath. It's with breath work. It's breath training. Our breath and our breath patterns are our direct knob to the state of our autonomic nervous system. We don't have a lot of other ways to directly impact our nervous system, but breath can do it every time. And so I often teach coherent breathing. And coherent breathing is simply balancing your breath, your inhale and your exhale. And ideally for most adults, it's about a 5-second inhale and a 5-second exhale. And if you just do that, even for 1 to 3 minutes, you can calm your autonomic nervous system and feel more calm and clear almost immediately.
It's amazing what the breath can do to calm our nervous system. Another practice that I learned recently, I think it's called 4-7-8 breathing. Breathing in for 4, holding it for 7 and exhaling for 8. And I've found that to be like, even with one breath, I can feel myself relaxing. And so I'll have to give the equal in and out a try as well. Not that I haven't, but a little bit more practice.
Yeah, one of the reasons why that breath cycle, the 4-7-8, is so wonderful is it's really extending the exhale. Most of us in our daily lives, we're not exhaling. We're not exhaling fully. And the exhale is what activates or stimulates the parasympathetic state of our nervous system. The parasympathetic being our rest and digest response. So when we extend and exhale, it's actually allowing our whole body mind to relax more. So what I love about doing a breath work like 4-7-8 is that it's like almost like strength training for your lungs and diaphragm. You're training your diaphragm to remember how to exhale fully because the diaphragm's a muscle. So when we forget to exhale, the diaphragm atrophies and we become chronic non-exhalers, if you will. But doing an extended exhale like you just described, it's like going to the gym and doing bicep curls, but you're doing it for your diaphragm. So well done.
Interesting. I've never really thought about it in that way. Obviously, when I think about and talk about meditation, I very much use the analogy of physical exercise, but this is actual physical exercise for your diaphragm. And you're building that muscle memory of I exhale fully and I activate the parasympathetic nervous system by doing that. One thing you mentioned before is the idea of contemplative practices and awareness practices. I've often thought of those as one and the same, but it sounds like you think about them and talk about them as separate practices. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So awareness is something we can do all the time. I talk about this in my book, active awareness and passive awareness. Most of the day, we're moving through life just aware. We're on a Zoom call and we're typing an email because nobody's really paying attention to what our fingers are doing. Or we are driving in the car and we end up at the store and we think, how did I get there? I really wasn't paying attention. So most of our lives, we're in this passive attention state of mind. And what happens is that we don't experience life, as I say, in high definition. We may miss stuff. Just to give you an example, I'm up here in the woods in New Hampshire temporarily. And yesterday, I was walking up the stairs during the middle of the day, and I just happened to look out the window into the backyard. And I saw this owl sitting in the snow, massive owl. It was so big. I've never seen an owl in real life, nor have I ever seen an owl very close up like that. And the owl stayed there for hours. And I thought to myself, if I was speeding up those stairs like I normally do, I might not have glanced out the window. And even if I glanced out the window, but my mind was busy, I might not have seen the owl because it's like camouflage. It looks like a piece of wood. When we could be more actively aware of what we're doing moment to moment, which is, again, the practice of mindfulness, paying attention on purpose, actively with all of our senses, we start to become more acutely aware of real subtleties that are happening. And it's not only subtleties maybe of what you're seeing, but what you're hearing, what you're feeling, what somebody else is doing with their facial expressions. So this is part of building awareness. And when we start to do that, and it doesn't even have to be in a formal meditation practice, we could just remember to be aware all day long. We build that muscle. Again, coming back to our metaphor of physical fitness, that's a very active state. Now, contemplative practices are practices that honestly, most of us in this Western world don't often give ourselves the time to do. I think that COVID in some crazy way has really helped us because we had more time. We weren't commuting. We weren't doing the errands and the busy work that we used to do. So we started to take time to do things that were slower, in solitude, in nature, and it could be extraordinarily beneficial for our physical well-being and our mental well-being as well. So I hope that those two became a little bit more clear.
Would you say that the way you think about it is the contemplative practices are more formal and dedicated practices, and the awareness practices are more in the moment, remembering to be aware?
You could look at it that way. I think that the formal practices in the way that I learned and been taught by my teachers is like a formal meditation practice. I'm going to sit and practice mindfulness or practice loving kindness or do a gratitude practice right now or a body scan. Those are more formal practices. I think that the awareness practices could be very informal and formal, but we can also remember to do them all day long, as well as with the contemplative. I think there's both the formal, such as if you were to sit down and chant or do a pray or journal, but then there's so many sweet contemplative times during the day. If you just went for a walk in the woods and you were just quiet, or cooking, chopping carrots, chopping potatoes, folding laundry. These can all be very quiet times when you're just with yourself, just allowing awareness to roam, allowing yourself to experience the textures, the sounds, the smells around you. In the end, Adam, honestly, it all melts together.
Yeah, that's what I'm finding. I was trying to say, am I missing something?
No.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, but thank you for explaining that. Another thing that came up for me is, as you were talking about mental fitness, is the interconnection between brain and body. Would you say that physical fitness is the foundation of mental fitness or a part of it? Or how would you think about that physical fitness part? And just for context, the reason I'm asking is because I'm very good at finding time to meditate and to practice awareness and those type of practices, contemplative practices, and so on. But I would not describe myself as great at making time for regular physical fitness. I've seen the benefits when I do it for a sustained period of time, the impact on my mind and my body, but I don't carve out as much time as I'd like. So I'd love to understand how critical it is to this idea of mental fitness.
That's great. I will say kudos to you for being disciplined in finding the time to meditate, because I think for most people, it's the opposite. They'll get the workout in, but the meditation, it's the end of the list. We all have our struggles when it comes to being consistent in different things. But I will start my answer with a quote from Dr. Roger Sperry, who was a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And he wrote that 90% of the stimulation to your brain comes from moving your spine. When we move our spine, it's stimulating our brain. It's all interconnected. We can't avoid that at all. So if we sit stagnant and we don't move, we will start to feel that mental dullness come over us. Whereas if we get up and we move our spine, and I have this very quick exercise I call the spinal six, and I can send you the link and it's on YouTube. The spinal six is simply moving your body in 6 directions. And the directions are backward, forward, side, twist. So if you just remember that, go backward, go forward, go side to side, twist. And if you do that several times a day, as you're doing right now, that is stimulating your brain. So that's for me, that's a real carrot stick as to why I want to move my body every day. And in a lot of ways, you're better off moving throughout the day than doing just one big workout and then sitting still for the rest of the day. So movement is key. It's key for not only that stimulation to our brain, but it's key for blood flow. And when the blood flows, that is stimulating everything. It's nourishing every organ, which at the end of the day goes up and it informs and nourishes our brain. So movement is key to mental fitness. And so is breath work. Breathing deeply, like we talked about before, moves the blood flow through the body, settles the nervous system. So by moving and breathing together, like you would on a fast walk or a jog or swimming, when you start moving and breathing in rhythm, you're not only establishing a coherent state, but you're also moving blood flow. The benefits go way beyond the six-pack abs, I have to tell you that.
Yes, they certainly do. And it's good because I used to think, oh, I want to have the six-pack abs. But honestly, I'm much more motivated by the mental fitness capacities that come from having a healthy body and a healthy mind. Continuing with this idea of the body, I'd love to explore the gut-brain connection and how that's emerged for you as a really important area.
I was introduced to the new science of the gut-brain connection a few years ago, about a year and a half ago, actually. It absolutely, no pun intended, blew my mind because I've spent my whole career understanding how to optimize body and brain and performance and access flow states, which I know we'll talk about in a bit. But when I started to understand that there was a level deeper than the nervous system that informs how I feel mentally, I went right to it. I dove in deep. I'll tell you, Adam. So the science of the microbiome, the gut microbiome, is maybe 15 years old at this point. The science of the connection between the gut microbiome and our brain is less than 5 years old. And what we are learning through this magnificent science is that the health of our gut microbiome, which is really made up of trillions of microbiota, trillions of bacteria and viruses, trillions. It's mind-blowing. So the health of that balance of the microbiome will inform how we feel mentally. And so many mental health issues such as anxiety and depression, ADD, ADHD, even autism are all traced back to gut health. So being that I have been in the mental performance world, the flow world, I am looking to help people really optimize performance. I wanted to know what does this have to do with feeling our best, performing our best, being our sharpest, being our clearest, being our most connected physically and mentally. Well, as it turns out, the bacteria in our gut produce the neurotransmitters such as serotonin, GABA, norepinephrine, and dopamine. Most of our neurotransmitters are actually produced by the bacteria in our gut. So when the gut is imbalanced, when we are not producing those neurotransmitters optimally, the signaling between the gut and the brain is not going to be as optimal. And the gut and the brain talk to each other through the immune system, the nervous system, the endocannabinoid system, and the enteric nervous system. And I'm not going to go through all of those, just to say that this is paradigm shifting. So basically, at the end of the day, our food, the food that we eat, does inform our mood and also our level of stress, medication, and environmental toxins as well will all either throw our system, our microbiome out of balance, or will help bring it into balance. So reducing stress, reducing toxins, reducing medication as you can, and also improving your food and your food supplements to enhance and modulate your microbiome is going to affect how you feel mentally. This is really where I'm spending a good portion of my work right now. I'm partnering with a company, Amari Global, that is targeting the gut-brain connection through really high-level micronutrients.
Yeah, I think that you shared an article on LinkedIn that I read, maybe in Mindful magazine or something like that, about this connection. And I was just like, mind blown. Had no idea. I had a sense that what you ate affected all aspects of kind of your life, but really this idea that a huge percentage of the neurotransmitters are created in your gut and then go to the rest of your body and your brain was really mind-blowing to me. If somebody wants to learn more about this gut-brain connection and the ways that they can improve their gut health, what would you point them to?
I've pulled it all together with a mental fitness protocol that I offer for free on my website. And it really focuses on your body, your brain, and your bio. And those three aspects. And when we can start to modulate and improve how our body systems synergize with our brain systems, synergize with our biome, now we're starting to really get at the root causes of some of our imbalances, whether they be a physical or mental imbalance. Like I said before, I've spent my whole career on this topic and have gone deeper and deeper into the engine of who we are. And I thought it was at the root when I was studying the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory and the nervous system, only to find out that there is this whole deeper connection between the gut and the brain, only to find out that there is this deeper system. It's like the soil of everything. The gut microbiome is the soil that informs the rest of our body. It has been so much fun to learn about this, to make changes in my own body, in my own biome, and then also to help others understand it and make changes in their own lives.
That's really interesting. Are there certain foods to avoid and foods to make sure that you're eating?
That's a big subject. What researchers and functional medicine practitioners have known for a long time is that our microbiomes are very unique. So because there's trillions of different species, it's hard to just say there's no one size fits all. But what you can do is understand the probiotics that you are taking and what the function is of those probiotics. For instance, the probiotics that I take range, but some of them are very specific to my mental wellness. So we're becoming more and more savvy in understanding what strain of bacteria, when healthy, how it impacts our body and our mind and our mental wellness. And this is what I think we're going to continue to see coming out of science.
Very interesting. So, Cara, I know that a lot of your work has been around this idea of the flow state. Can you share a little bit about your work in that area?
Yes, I love talking about flow. When I was 19 years old, I had a flow experience as a college track runner where I ran the race of my life. And I knew at that moment that my life had changed because I had experienced something, a way of being that felt very familiar, almost like I had felt when I was a child. And yet I was extraordinarily powerful. I accessed strength I didn't know I had. I was calm and clear mentally. And so back then, there wasn't a whole lot of information on what I had experienced. But yet I found that yoga and then meditation provided me with disciplines of training my body and mind to experience flow more often. And so in later years, there was a seminal book written by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. The book is called Flow, that he started to bring forth this understanding of flow as being an optimal experience where we feel and perform our best. And I devoured that book and went on to continue my deep dive into flow, yoga and meditation as good practices to become more subtly aware of these optimal states. Years later, I found Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler, who are really two of the top experts in pulling together all the flow science. And I worked with Jamie and Stephen, still friends of mine, to really understand how do we apply certain triggers? How do we access flow by applying certain triggers in our lives, because flow is not something that we find. It's actually a state that we access. And that's really, I think, an important point. We are born to feel present. We're born to feel alive. And yet, as we go through life and we accumulate conditions and patterns of life experience, we start to shut ourselves down from trusting that these optimal states or experiences are really at our fingertips. And what flow science has done is it has unpacked the flow state to understand what's happening from a neuroanatomical level, because there is this cascade of neurotransmitters that come online when we're in our flow state that change the way our brain is functioning at this time. It's some fancy term called transient hyperfrontality, where our prefrontal cortex actually powers down so that the inner critic goes quiet and we feel more awake and alive to our experience. So that's all from the neuroanatomical standpoint. But how do we access flow more often? This is $1 million question. Check Set Me High, and then later on, Jamie Wheel and Stephen Kotler went on to explore these flow triggers. And there are environmental triggers, psychological triggers that can help us more predictably access flow. For instance, playing with gravity often will allow us to access flow. And the best example is jumping out of a plane. Like, you're defying gravity, right? You are playing with gravitational forces. When you turn yourself upside down, when you're skiing down a mountain, when you're climbing, you're playing with your body and gravity. And that happens to be a really strong flow trigger. Another flow trigger is high consequences, like jumping out of the plane or standing up in front of a crowd makes you hyper vigilant, like hyper awake and alert. And that triggers this cascade of neurotransmitters. It triggers us into this neuroanatomical state where we lose our sense of self, where time seems to slow down or speed up, where life becomes rich, your sensations become hyper defined, right? We can explore and understand our own flow triggers and our own primary flow activities. And what I would say to you, Adam, is that probably, I'm assuming, that deep embodiment, the deep embodiment that you experience in your meditation practice is a flow trigger for you. It brings you into that optimal experience.
Very interesting. You're answering the questions that are coming to my mind as I'm thinking them. So I appreciate that. I was going to ask you about this idea of flow triggers, playing with gravity and high consequences. Those are triggers that I've experienced flow when those are present. Snowboard is probably the most obvious one for me, but also leading the podcast or facilitating Search Inside Yourself at Google in front of a group of 80 people. Those things really allow me to get into it and really feel that flow state. It's nice to have language around that. And actually, I met Jamie and Stephen when they came to Google.
All right.
Probably 6 years ago or something like that. I went to a talk with them and then I was just like, I'm going to say what's up, and ended up like hanging around with them and having lunch with them. And it was great. You mentioned that meditation and yoga are great tools to help you understand your own flow states and flow triggers. Can you talk a little bit more about how the practices of meditation, mindfulness, and yoga help us in that way?
Yes. I find flow or access flow. Finding flow it rolls off the tongue, but it's really accessing flow when deeply embodied in my practices. And I'll just start with yoga because I think that a lot of probably your listeners can relate to a time, whether it be on a run or swimming or climbing a mountain or just being deep in the woods walking, when you just feel deeply embodied. And embodied simply means that most of your awareness is in your body and you're not getting caught up in your busy mind, in your thinking mind. And so that's what happens if you think about when you're led in a yoga practice, or if you're just leading yourself, you start to become more interested in what's happening physically than what the mind is doing. So thoughts may come and go, but you're not even paying attention because you're feeling the pull of one of your hamstring muscles, or you're feeling the release in your neck or your back, or the exhilaration of being in a balancing pose. And so your body captures your attention. And that's what being embodied is about. And that helps us to experience life in what you would say is a non-ordinary way. An ordinary experience, most of us ordinarily experience life through the lens of our busy mind, through the lens of our doubting mind, our worried mind, our judging mind. We see life through those filters. But when we can get down into our body, into our breath, into movement, rhythm, sweat and strain, even a little bit of sensation when you're feeling sensation in your body, it holds our attention. So taking it the next step into a meditation practice, which is a little more challenging because you're not moving unless you're doing a walking meditation, you become finely attuned. We often use our breath as an anchor for our mind. So we start our practice by just becoming absorbed in breathing, in the experience of breathing, in the quality and the temperature, in the sensations in our body as we breathe. What we're doing is using our breath as an anchor to hold our mind and attention away from the thinking and in the body. And we can then go even deeper to start to pay attention to different physical sensations or the quality of being in our body in this moment. And so these are ways that that deep embodiment becomes a flow trigger. It starts to enrapture us in the moment. It holds us in presence. And so that even when thoughts do come by the mind's eye, which they will, because as we know, we can't stop that mind from thinking, it's what it does, we at least recognize it more quickly and come back home to the anchor that we're exploring, being the breath or the seat or a candle or a mantra, whatever it be.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I'd love to switch gears and talk a little bit about entrepreneurship. You've built your career and your business around teaching mental fitness, among other things. I'd love to hear what your experience is of building a business, sharing these practices, these techniques, this research that you've done.
I'll start by saying business is a business. So at the end of the day, building any business holds the challenges of employees and customers and rent and payroll and all of that. I feel so fortunate that I've been able to, since I was 24 years old, build businesses off of my passion. And my passions have been body-brain practices, body-brain optimization. And my most long-standing business is the yoga studio, yoga and meditation center that I sold at the end of 2019 called Verge Yoga. I started Verge in 2004, just as the trend of yoga was starting to hit the mainstream. I feel fortunate in that I was at a really good place at the right time. And what was so wonderful being a teacher of yoga and meditation as I was also running the business was that it became my laboratory. It became a laboratory for playing with practice and playing with what works and doesn't work in a busy Western mind. And so while I could also say my own personal body and brain were the main laboratories for my work, it was also in the laboratory of the studio that it formed so much of what I did outside the studio. When I started going outside in training athletes and CEOs and teams. It all came back to my laboratories being my own personal practice and the practices that I was developing and the models I was developing at Verge. So, like I said before, it doesn't come without the struggles and challenges of running any business, but does intertwine so much so with your own personal transformation that in some ways the lines become invisible. And that's a good and a not so good thing sometimes.
Very interesting. Yeah, it sounds like you had great timing on the beginning and the end of that business.
Yes.
The end of 2019 was a great time to sell a yoga studio.
I'll tell you, I'm very grateful that we had the transaction and our new owner is doing a spectacular job of staying sustainable. I'm still very much involved in supporting her because it's in many ways my baby. And my heart truly breaks right now for small business owners, especially small fitness studios. It is a really challenging time. Just as a little plug out there to all of your listeners, if you have that favorite small gym, small studio, do what you can to support them because we need group practice out there. There's nothing like sitting in circle in meditation with other people rather than doing it on a Zoom or YouTube.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. And I think that there is so much value to being in community, to practicing a community, talking about how this is landing and evolving for each person. And I really like that idea of using the business and the studio as a laboratory for you to hone these practices, which you then can have taken into, I assume, the book and into your corporate work and your coaching work and all of that. So that's really interesting. I guess, how did that leap into the corporate world happen? Any advice? That's something that I do at Google, but they don't pay me to do that. And I've recently led my first non-Google meditation session, which I also wasn't paid for. But I guess I'm curious as to, how do you approach companies or organizations and offer your teachings there?
That's a really good question. And there are a lot of people out there, great coaches, great teachers, and great facilitators that are entering into the corporate wellness market. And I think that the sky's the limit, honestly. I think especially coming out of the pandemic, I think we're all recognizing that it's not just a luxury to have these things at work. It's a necessity. So I'm encouraging you and others out there to find your niche. And I think that the thing is to really know what your strengths are and where your enthusiasm is. Where are you enthusiastic? What are you enthusiastic about teaching, about exploring, about supporting out there? Because that comes through in droves. You can have the fanciest website and the slickest sales funnel, but if there isn't that true natural enthusiasm and excitement for what you're doing, at the end of the day, it's going to come through. People are going to know. So really sit with yourself and journal about it. What specifically do I love talking about? And then you can build something around that. And listen, I started free as well. And I still do free. Last Saturday, I did a webinar for 40 women free just because of the organization and I wanted to support them. So it doesn't mean you always have to be paid the big bucks, but you start slowly build from there. I think the big thing is really knowing what you're enthusiastic about and then just staying consistent and on message, how you're presenting yourself out there on social media and how your messaging is in your emails when you're talking to people. What makes you come alive? And honestly, for me, that is what I'm most enthusiastic about teaching, is helping people recognize what makes them come alive and then to help them build in the practices and the activities that help them to feel more alive more often, which is where the mental fitness comes in. So I hope that ties it together for you. This really is an inside job. When you want to go out and start to explore how to help people understand their mind, such as you're doing Adam, with meditation, that's a big deal when you help people start to look at their mind. So I think that when we take our practices seriously, we will be able to express ourselves in a way that has a real depth and professionalism to it.
It certainly resonates with me, tapping into what you're really passionate about, what you love talking about, what brings you alive. It's actually coming back to me that this came up in episode 2 of the podcast with my friend Lori Schwanbeck, who is a psychotherapist and teaches emotional intelligence and mindfulness and compassion. And she gave the same advice. She said, figure out what you really care about and what you really want to teach, because you don't have to teach everything. As you said, there are so many people out there doing this work or trying to do this work. I think there's only going to be more and more, or maybe at just a little bit after the point that you started the studio where yoga was becoming mainstream. I think mindfulness is very much mainstream. And as you said, the pandemic has illuminated that this is not just a luxury, it's a necessity. I'm finding I'm doing more and more mindfulness and resilience type trainings at Google because people are just struggling. It's a lot to go through what we're all going through. Then to add working and parenting full time and schooling children and things like that, or being alone and being lonely, right? There's so many different types of struggles that people are having. And I'm finding there's a real need and appetite for simple practices that can help. Okay, so let's shift gears now into what I call the Mindful Fire Final 4. So the first question is around this idea of emergence. It's something that you mentioned is really top of mind for you. I'd love to give you the opportunity to share, what does emergence mean and how does it show up in your life?
Yeah, thank you for asking me that. What emergence means for me is the capacity to be quiet enough mentally and physically to really hear, to discern, to intuit the messages that are coming through me. So our body speaks to us through the language of sensation, constantly, never ending. We are processing information from the outer world, from inside of us. And so often we're so stuck in our mind that we don't have the ability to sense into that quickening of the stomach, the tightening of the throat, the impulse to say something or do something. So for me, emergence is, and living in emergence is having the inner quiet. And that doesn't mean I'm always sitting still with my eyes closed. It's an inner stillness and an inner quiet that allows me to listen internally before speaking, before acting. And what I find is that things just seem to work out much more than they do when I live that way.
Thank you for sharing that. The second question is, what piece of advice would you give to someone getting started with mindfulness and meditation?
Great question. Start small, stay steady, and build from there. Keep it small and consistent, because consistency is key. You will start to look forward to the times of practice, the quiet. But if you try to take on too much too fast, then you're likely to blow yourself out of the water.
Great advice. Great advice. Absolutely. Consistency is everything. It's not about how much you meditate. It's about the fact that you meditate consistently. The third question is, what advice would you give someone early on their path to financial independence?
Yes, good question. Again, I'm going to say, know what you are naturally enthusiastic about. Just because everyone is buying Bitcoin doesn't mean that you should go buy Bitcoin if you don't even have any interest in it. So often people are chasing trends instead of really understanding what lights you up, because what lights you up is what's going to keep you curious and it's going to keep you consistent. If somebody asked me, how did you write your book? I was so lit up about writing my book that I got up at 4:30 every day for 6 months to write for 4 or 5 hours before my day job. But it was because I was so lit up about it that it kept me in the game. Do the insight work first before going out and jumping into a new business.
Yeah, that's great advice. The final question is, where can people connect with you online and find out more about what you're working on?
The best place to reach me is on my website, and that's carabradley.net, Cara with the C. I usually have everything on there, tons of free stuff, my podcast and that mental fitness protocol on there. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram most. And you can find me at my name, Cara Bradley.
Okay, fantastic. I will link all of that in the show notes and, of course, link your book as well. Thank you so much, Cara. It's been an absolute pleasure to connect with you today. I feel like I learned so much. And so I just want to say thank you so much for being here on the Mindful Fire podcast.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you. You're a wealth of knowledge and bringing such a great service and information to the world. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining me on today's episode of the Mindful Fire podcast. If you got value from today's episode, make sure to hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this. This just lets the platforms know you're getting value from the episodes and you want to be here when I produce additional content. As a reminder, you can find the full show notes for today's episode, including any links, resources, or books mentioned in the episode at mindfulfire.org/46. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love to ask you to do me one favor, and that's just to take your favorite episode and send it to a friend or two who might get value from listening to it. Doing that will help the podcast reach new people and would really mean the world to me. Thank you so much for all your support, and I'll catch you next time on the Mindful Fire podcast.